Good evening, everybody. It's Chris Howarth here again from Making Changes. Hope everybody's doing okay. As you've probably guessed, you're going to be seeing some more videos from myself whilst I do some more promotional work on the Making Changes page, both on Facebook and on Instagram. And as part of that, I put one of my best shirts on tonight to make an effort. What you think of that, I don't know. But essentially, the ethos of the bit of the talk tonight, and it's not going to be too long a talk, it's based on the fact that what a lot of people ask me is, what is the end goal when people stop drinking or they stop, taking drugs, and how can they continue with life? And in short, the ultimate goal for any one of us as human beings is to be happy. As alcoholics, which is what I am, or whatever your issue might be, the way that our minds work can sometimes find that much more difficult than it can be for other people who can find it much more naturally. So what I'm going to do is take you through one of the mantras that's included in Making Changes, because what we do, especially at the beginning, is we work on a lot of exercises which help you basically to stop drinking, to understand why you need to stop drinking, and to try and get rid of that denial and that delusion. And as things progress, we then turn more into how we can actually start living a life in such a way where the way that I described it for myself, and hopefully this will be the same for other people, is that it's not about I don't sort of need a drink, it's that I don't want to drink at all because my life has become so much better. And a lot of that comes down to learning how to live in a different way. And so what I'm going to go through tonight is just a couple of pages. Bear with me because it's stuff that's written down in a Word document that's included in part of the program, so it might come across as slightly robotic, but I'll try and speak it in such a way which isn't too robotic, but I will be reading from a Word document. So yeah, in that respect, I'll kick things off. So in the program of Making Changes, we explore the behavioural, the moral and ethical aspects of spiritual development. In order to do this successfully, we need to be living a life of integrity and non-harming. That's absolutely key. And especially for a lot of us, we've not been doing that. There's been no integrity and we've been harming mainly ourselves, but a lot of the times we've been harming other people as well in all different manner of ways of harming people. So how can we expect to develop that inner peace that we need if our outer lives are consistently disrupted with squabbles, selfishness and harm? So this is about looking at when we stop the drink or the drugs, we can't continue acting in that same sort of way, otherwise we don't change and we don't become better people. So without the foundation of integrity and non-harming is a key theme, and non-harming is quite a broad theme that can cover many areas, but without the foundation of integrity and non-harming, no real authentic spiritual growth can really be possible. And the key word there is authentic. So in order to help us do this, we can follow something, and this is that I do include, that originates back from all the way from times of Buddhism. For those of you that know about Making Changes, it is a non-religious program, so there's no real aspects of Buddhism or anything else that's included in it. What I have done is just taken some aspects out of things like Buddhism that can be translated into language which applies for today. So the point I'm trying to make is you don't need to become a Buddhist to try and follow some of these guidelines. It's just one place that I've found sort of these guidelines from, which I think that can be helpful. So they are called the 5 precepts, and to be honest with you, moving forwards, and as the program develops, and it will consistently be developing, I might rename that because it's quite a traditional and old-fashioned way of describing them. But for now, we'll call them the 5 precepts. So again, yeah, try and forget about the Buddhist link. Just think of them as, the 5 precepts and essentially 5 rules to live by. And they are just good moral codes for us to live by. And they all fall under non-harming. So number 1, it's quite a serious one, not to kill. Now, we all know that rule, and so it's not necessarily about the obvious of what that states. We break that down, and it's about actually how we deal with other people. And so it might be something like, shutting down our spouse in terms of when they want to put a point of view across and just dismissing them. It might be not taking somebody else's problem seriously. So there's all different aspects that fall under that not to kill. What it's actually about is, and I've seen this happen in relationships where over time people can have an effect on a relationship which almost chips away at that person's personality. So that over time and over time and over time, that person who they've been having an effect on, they've not killed them, but they've almost killed their personality, their self-esteem, and the actual person that they used to be. So it kind of falls into that. So it's not, whilst the literal sense of not to kill obviously makes sense, but it has a much deeper meaning to it as well. And I've mentioned a few examples there, but there's more examples as well that are in the programme as to what that relates to. The second one, again, quite an obvious one, and these are all quite old-fashioned statements that you can find in in many spiritual programs, but we try and develop them in different types of ways. So number 2 is not to steal, and that's an obvious one, just about stealing anything. Now for addicts of all sorts, myself, I would not necessarily steal things from things like shops or anything like that, but what I would do is I will manipulate people like my grandfather to get money to feed my addiction, with the intention of paying him back, but knowing deep down that I wouldn't be able to pay him back. So essentially that is a form, of stealing. I think that can be worse for people who may have other addictions to do with things like heroin and stuff like that, although I don't profess to be an expert in those particular addictions. But when it comes to sort of not stealing, it can be about all manner of different things in terms of, ideas that we might take from somebody else. It might be in the workplace, whereby we are thinking that we're talking confidentially to somebody about an idea, and we go away and we take that idea to the boss. So again, that's another example of stealing. It's not just that stereotypical view of going into a shop or going into somebody's house and burgling the house or stealing something from a shop. It's got a much deeper meaning. And again, in the program, we go into these types of examples into a bit more detail. Number 3 is not to harm with our sexuality. Now, I'll be honest, this has been a big thing for me. I think when you come out of sobriety, when you come out of addiction into sobriety, at first for me, dating was very difficult, and I didn't date for 12 months at least, as was advised by my therapist. But then trying to date sober, when every single date or sexual encounter that I'd ever had, I'd always been drunk. Every relationship that I've ever had, I'd been drunk for the majority of it, and that's why they all ended up tragically. But then when I became more confident and I was able to go out on dates completely sober, be myself, be very confident, something that I've never ever felt before. And it's even worse these days with applications like Tinder, and being able to meet people online. And it's very easy to act out sexually and use people just for those particular means. I always remember listening to Russell Brand, and I know it's been a problem, for him after his addiction in terms of, drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And essentially it's about using women and not looking at women as actual people and as human beings. So that's what this relates to. And it also relates to ourselves as well. In this day and age, pornography across the internet is itself a massive problem that people can become addicted to. Fortunately, myself, I've not had that problem. My problem's probably been more around, Tinder and using it for the wrong means. And that's something that I've got better at, and I've been working more at, to actually use it for the right way, to actually meet somebody for a proper relationship, rather than other means that are, related to sex, basically. But in terms of harming ourselves, certainly the pornography thing is something to be aware of, because a bit like gambling and things like that, they are behavioral problems that can really harm ourselves, and they can really twist our mentality towards what should be a healthy approach to intimacy, and a good, honest, real, loving sexual relationship. And so number 3 is to not harm with our sexuality, and again, that's harming ourselves or other people. Number 4 is not to lie or harm with speech. So the lying thing, for alcoholics or drug addicts, lying is just part and parcel of it. A lot of the time it's lying about our addiction, and we've all done that. I was talking to somebody today about how much of a full-time job it is actually lying about your addiction. It becomes a full-time job in itself, and it's absolutely tiresome. And obviously, when you're under the influence, you can't remember the majority of the lies that you've actually said as well. So one thing I would say about when we get into sobriety is that we stop lying and we become honest people about anything, and this is why when I've spoke to you about sexuality and things like that, about it, still being a potential issue for me at times, it's because I'm honest, and I'm honest about my good qualities and the qualities that I need to work on as well. I'm 7 years sober, but I've got, it's progress, not perfection. And that's why it's always about honesty. And so lying is a really important part, because even when we're in recovery, we can still lie to ourselves, and we can be deluded, and we can tell ourselves lies just to kind of make sure that we skate over the real truth of what's going on, so that we can justify whatever behaviour it is that we might want to get away with. And then there's the obvious one about lying to other people. Again, and that comes back to integrity. Lying to other people is just not a way to live with integrity. And like a lot of these things, if we do these things, we don't realise that they actually build up, and we end up carrying them around with us in terms of guilt and shame, and a big weight on our shoulders. And as we all know, for addiction for years, one of the key things that we try and do when we get into sobriety is to learn how to get rid of all that baggage that we carry around with ourselves. So by not lying, we are able to not carry that baggage around with us, and that's such a relief. And for those people like myself who suffer massively, or did suffer massively with anxiety, by not lying and just being honest, even when being honest might not be something that somebody wants to hear, you've been honest and you've said your piece, and you've got nothing to feel guilty about. In relation to that, it also talks about harming people with speech. And this takes a lot of practice. and it takes a long time to perfect in a number of situations, whether that's family situations, which are probably the worst, work situations, which certainly I've found difficult. But I also relate it to gossip as well, and talking about other people. So we've probably all heard this saying before, that if you've not got nothing kind to say, don't say it at all. At the same time, there are instances where we have to set boundaries. If people are treating us like a doormat, we have to say things in the right way, and be assertive. And that comes with time and wisdom and practice of being able to do that. But I think if we can start off by learning to, in the moment, think about what we're about to say, and if it's going to cause harm, really have a think about whether we should be saying it or not. When it comes to the actual speech that we use in terms of talking about other people, and this can happen massively in the workplace, and if I'm honest, it's something I do much less of now. But when you work, which I do still part-time, as well as making changes in a corporate environment, people are very quick to slag off other people, and sometimes you just have to kind of be non-committal and not get involved in that, but it can be difficult. But getting used to not gossiping about other people is a really good quality to have, and I think the less that you do it and the more accustomed that you become to not doing it, the better that you feel about yourself. And it all comes back to this thing about living with integrity, and by not gossiping about other people, no matter what you might think about them, it means, and it's a famous phrase, it means you're keeping your side of the street clean and you're living with integrity. And the final one, of number 5, and again, these all fall under non-harming. So the final one, hopefully for us people that are going through this program, is to not use intoxicants. So the obvious ones are obviously drink or drugs. I think there can be a grey area at times with medications, depending on what your situation is. If you suffer with depression, anxiety. I know in 2017 I had a very serious knee operation after a football injury, whereby they had to take parts of my hamstring from my other leg into my left leg, and I was in absolute agony. And for the period after that, I had to take morphine, and I think for 1 or 2 days it was something like codeine. But for me, I had to ask myself honestly, am I okay with this? And I spoke to my mentor at the time, and asked him, and the response was that sometimes, Chris, when you're in absolute agony and you've been through an operation, it's okay to take those types of things. Obviously, we have to be mindful that we have an addictive mindset, and so what I advise in those situations is that you tell as many people as possible, including your doctors and the people that are prescribing those things, what your background is, so that you can have it monitored and you make sure that it doesn't end up becoming a problem. But to not use intoxicants is obviously an obvious one, and if we're not abiding to that rule, well, we're never going to abide to any of the other rules that are under non-harming. So I've explained what those 5 kind of guidelines or precepts are there. It's probably going on a little bit longer than what I envisaged, but I'll keep going because I think it's quite useful for what I've got to say. So we go on to now talk about that. These are critical guidelines for living, as they touch many, if not all, aspects of our lives, especially our relationships, and their relationships that are family relationships, friendly relationships, and also professional relationships as well. And if we can learn to live by these types of rules in all those situations, we will generally find that all those relationships will improve much more than what they ever have been before, especially when we were drinking alcohol addictively or taking drugs addictively. Another point about this as well is to separate action from spirituality. And the key word there is about separating action from spirituality is a common mistake among some of us that are more inexperienced. And I talk there about myself because I've done this when I was a bit more inexperienced. And we like to think of our spiritual practice as transcending day-to-day concerns and hopefully ridding us of the annoyances of work, family, bills, traffic, and all the rest of what is just quite simply life. So for me, I thought, well, if I do all this spiritual stuff, whether it's meditating in the morning, saying some affirmations, whether it's doing other things that are spiritually based, if I do all that, none of these problems to do with work, family, bills, traffic, whatever, the usual things that wind me up on a day-to-day basis, they're just going to go away. We obviously know now that it's not true, but it's a common mistake, and many people sometimes think, well, that's why I want to get into living a spiritual life, because it will get rid of all those things. Now, it won't get rid of them, but if we continue to practice spirituality and a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, and look, these 5 precepts are just one of the mantras that are included in making changes. There are quite a number of others as well that all kind of link in to help us. But what I've just spoken about there, unfortunately, it's actually called avoidance. It's something that's called a spiritual bypass. It's the effort to somehow skip over life's mundane challenges and have a problem-free existence by being extra spiritual, when we all know that's just not the way it works. Well, those of us that are experienced, that's not the way that it works. And if you're quite new into this, please don't get disheartened by what I'm saying to you, because you have to start somewhere, and the sooner you start trying to live by these types of morals and living with integrity, you will learn about these things, and we all make mistakes, and we'll learn from those mistakes. This is just trying to give you a heads up, on what can happen. That trying to use spirituality in this way to somehow skip over life's mundane challenges just doesn't work, because life is life, and life will always have challenges. The key is to get to a spiritual point where it doesn't matter what those life challenges are, that we can just still remain spiritual, we can remain on an even keel, we can remain balanced. We're not necessarily overly positive, but we're not necessarily overly negative. I'll give you a true example of me at the moment. So I'm undergoing some tests for my pancreas, and I stopped drinking over 7 years ago, and the consultant has said that there might be issues with my pancreas even though I stopped drinking 7 years ago. So I'm due hopefully for an endoscopic ultrasound over the next couple of weeks to find out if there is an issue there, because I've been having kind of stomach pains. But I'll be completely honest with you, I can still sleep at night, I can carry on with my day, I don't really give it a second thought, and it's because it is what it is. It comes down to acceptance. Now, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I was quite new into sobriety, that would not have been the case at all. I would have done nothing but worry about it when it's something that's actually just completely out of my control. And whatever those results are, I know that I'm spiritually strong enough now to be able to deal with them. But that's taken some time for me to get to that place. And we all have to start somewhere. And I'm not expecting that somebody who's quite new into this is able to handle that in that sort of similar way. And that's not to say I don't worry it sometimes, because obviously, I'm human and I do worry about certain things, but then I try and put into practice the things that I know and the things that I've learnt about, and that then helps me deal with it. So moving on to the next bit of text, this true, authentic and spiritual life that we want to lead is more than following the rules and being a good person on the surface. It's about the choices that we make moment by moment, every single day, even when we're by ourselves. the choice to be generous and kind, the choice to be attentive to others and their needs, the choice to be of service as well. So you may have come across a lot of these things before, but it's very important that if we can wake up on a daily basis and remind ourselves to act this way, we will ultimately end up happier people and more spiritual people. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. So while selfishness and rudeness don't necessarily break the 5 precepts that I spoke about, in a way they might as well, because they do have the same effect, and that is harming others. So if we can learn to not be selfish and not be rude to other people, no matter how they might treat us, and that's what's really difficult. You know, I've had it with, you know, my own father, my brother, people at work, and I've not always got it right. But I'll tell you something, 7 years in now, I'm in probably the best place I've ever been in to be able to deal with those types of things without being selfish or rude to them, no matter how they might treat me or how I perceive them to be treating me, because they've got their own reasons for thinking the way that they think. And I always try and put that into perspective as well, that they've got their own reasons. And by not getting involved in those things, guess what? It makes me a happier person as well. And again, that's what it's all about. So again, just moving on. Yes, it's true that spiritual practice can be done in a selfish way. But this is not to say that sitting in meditation or taking time to go on retreat is necessarily selfish. As with all actions, the karmic impact is determined by the intention behind it. The larger context of living this way then, in my humble opinion, is that following these types of precepts or guidelines is in and of itself an act of something I like to call loving kindness, which is a type of meditation, which we'll learn more about actually in the program of Making Changes. I won't go into it today, but it's an act of loving kindness. And let's face it, we all need more of that in the world that we live in today. There was once a famous scholar called Venerable Analayo, who said that, in fact, moral conduct, is an expression of compassion. And that's what it is. So the way that we act, our conduct, ourselves, it's about compassion to ourselves, but to our fellow human beings, and actually all beings. You know, I've got a pet, my pet Labrador, who's my best mate, you know, and it's to all beings across, you know, all the world, no matter what. And if we can show compassion, that moral conduct, we've got that nailed down, really. He also went on to say that whether we see those precepts as an act of loving kindness or ones of compassion, the point actually is essentially the same, that non-harming is itself of benefit to the world. So when we go back to that selfishness, first of all, non-harming helps us first and foremost. And when we're starting a recovery program, we have to have that selfishness, because if we don't, we can't help other people. So if we can learn to non-harm against ourselves, we can then progress to non-harming the rest of society, as I've mentioned in those kind of 5 precepts. And as this famous scholar Venerable Analayo has said, non-harming is in itself of benefit to the world. And what better way to be than being a person that can benefit the world, even if it's in our own small way. Morality isn't just about being good or not taking on bad karma, but rather about living in the world with care for others and ourselves. And that just kind of carries on the theme of what I've been saying there about being of benefit, you know, to the world, ourselves, and all beings. And this becomes clearer when we think of the positive versions of the precepts, such as kindness, generosity, intimacy, honesty, and clarity. And they're just 5 kind of principles there. Now, as part of making changes, we do go into many others, but things like kindness, generosity, intimacy, honesty, and clarity, I think I had some of those very deep down in me before addiction started. Certainly as a kid, I was a sort of a naturally kind kid, generous, honest. But obviously all those things got lost during my addiction. And in the end, I had no real idea how to be kind, generous, intimate, honest, and I had no clarity on anything. So again, when we get into recovery, and asking ourselves the question, well, what about when we put the drink down or the drugs down? How do we start to live? Well, if we start to learn about these principles, which we probably don't know too much about, the idea is then hopefully that we end up in a position where we're actually happy because we're adding so much to society. We're proud of ourselves. Our self-esteem comes back. Our self-respect comes back. And when all those things come back, it's much easier then to feel a way where we don't want to drink or we don't want to take drugs. I'm not saying it's never a threat and that it never goes away, but we have to learn about all this sort of stuff when we put the drink or the drugs down to give ourselves the best chance of remaining sober for the long term. And finally, we're nearly finished, I promise. So many things aren't always put in positive terms. So if we look at the precepts, about non-harming and, not stealing, and not talking to people in a certain way, they're all kind of put in sort of negative terms and not in positive terms. But we can easily see that by refraining from violence, theft, sexual harm, lies, and intoxication, we are instead living with that phrase, loving kindness. So that's that positive spin. If we can negate all those negative behaviours, we can then start living with those positive behaviours such as loving kindness, compassion, and all those other ones that I mentioned before. And there's many, many more. There's dozens of different principles that we can learn about that all help us, be the best versions that we can be of ourselves. And finally, just to say, this confirms the true human principle that poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, which, are not just part of people that are addicts. There can be people that are in power. There could be people who are not addicts who suffer from things like greed, hatred, and delusion. And I feel really sorry for people who have those, defects to their character. But this confirms that true human principle that the poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, they're not the essence of our true nature. Human beings were not meant to be that way. A lot of us have got lost along the way, and that's how we found ourselves. So that's why when those things are dispelled, what's left is our inherent goodness, and that's where we want to be. And as I always say to people that I work with, and you'll have heard this phrase probably already, we're not bad people, we've just got a bit lost. And in general, my belief is that the vast majority of the human race are good people. And if most people did a program like this, even if you had an addiction problem or not, we would all benefit as a society. So that's pretty much it, really. I hope it didn't come across as too robotic in terms of me reading text from a Word document on my laptop, and I hope those points came across in the right way. I tried to elaborate on some of the text rather than just reading it out word for word, and hopefully that gives you some idea about what I'm trying to do with making changes. In terms of progress, I might have mentioned before that I'm currently talking to a number of charities, and the idea being that we will try and look to implement this program into various charities, where other programs might not be the right fit for certain people, and this just becomes another option for them. And if it's the right fit and it helps more people, then even better. So I'll be posting more videos talking about what's in the program, some of the mantras and the ethoses behind making changes, what I've included based on my research. So just a bit on my background, obviously 7 years sober, worked for the AA for a couple of years in Manchester on the phone lines. And again, just to point out that I'm not religious, but I don't turn my nose up either at something like AA or people who are religious. My belief is do whatever you need to do to get well, and I don't really care how you do that. It's about whatever works for you. I've also been a peer supporter at the Priory group, so getting involved in group therapies and helping with sort of my experience, and also helping facilitate aftercare groups, talking about my experience and how what I've been through can help other people. What else? So yeah, one of the main thing is, which actually prompted me to make this program, is I did a master's degree through Middlesex University in comparative drug and alcohol studies, and the dissertation that I wrote was actually based on this program, and looking at alternative methods of helping people, looking at all different types of treatment programs from the UK, from the US, from Canada, from Australia, and even Europe, because the course was with other students from Spain, Denmark and Italy. So I learned about all these different types of ways that we can try and help people, and incorporated all that information, as well as my own experience, into the program. The program at the moment is quite long, so there's going to be a couple of options. There's going to be an option to do the program probably through charities, which might take a month, and I've not decided yet. There might be an option to do the program over longer periods, like 6 or 12 months, but I think sometimes the best impact can be if we can get all this point across in a month, and that can really help have that strong impact on somebody to hopefully give them enough of a kick and enough inspiration to be able to put down the drink or the drug, or whatever it might be, gambling, sex, or whatever behaviour that it might be. Anyway, I'm conscious that I've rambled on now. This video will be going up on my Making Changes Facebook page. I've not normally been too big on Facebook for making changes, but that's going to increase. And I've also got my Instagram page. I'd love to hear any feedback, either positive or negative. I'm massive on user involvement. So when people do start going through this program, I want feedback from people that go through the program to let me know what they think works and what could be improved, because I want to make sure that the program consistently improves and it's the best that it can be. The one thing I would ask is please try and refrain from any kind of nasty comments or anything like that. I don't mind sort of critique, an honest critique, and where you think things can be improved and where you might not agree with something. That's absolutely fine. I'm more than open to that whatsoever. I don't want to shut down debate at all. But yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback. Please like it. The more shares the better, because I'm trying to grow this and get more people aware of it. There's already a number of charities just based on one video that I did the other day, who I'm now talking to. So the more that I can do this, obviously the more charities that I can speak to. I'm also talking to people who help, ex-offenders, people that are out of work, people who've got different types of mental health problems. So there's lots of scope for collaboration and things like that. So yeah, please, hopefully you got something out of what I've said there. And if you can share and like and spread the message, that'd be much appreciated. Thanks for your time. Realise it's late at night. And yeah, look after yourselves and take care. Cheers.